Prog rock from the 70s had all but disappeared in the 80s or conformed to new wave music. However, a lot of metal bands during the 80s began to experiment with progressive tendencies, sometimes a little bit less notable, like Metallica or Megadeth. However, some bands really delved into what would become prog metal, starting with the band Iron Maiden. However, a lot of people cite Iron Maiden as branching off into many different subjects of metal, most notably prog metal and power metal. However, there had to be another band to connect Iron Maiden to prog metal, and that band is Fate's Warning. Fate's Warning was started in 1982 by the prog metal god himself, Jim Matheos, who was the main guitarist of the band and main songwriter. He then got my absolute favorite metal vocalist of all time, known as John Arch, a guy that for some reason decided to dress like Questar from the TV show Dino Riders all the time. At first they'd start sounding a lot like Iron Maiden, especially in the first album, On Brocken. But then the band slowly and surely became what we would know today as prog metal in every way, shape, and form. Let's start with the classic and amazing John Arch era with Night on Brocken. Fate's Warning were signed to Metal Blade Records, who kind of fucked them over in the early 80s. Well, to be fair, Metal Blade didn't really have that much of a budget, but the reason Fate's Warning's so underrated is because they were hardly ever promoted. I mean, they were on kind of a shitty label with Metal Blade, and none of the John Arch stuff really had any big hit singles or any music videos because they didn't really give a shit. It was only until that he left that they actually made a fucking music video. Night on Brocken came out in 1984. Their first album sounds quite a lot like stuff like Iron Maiden or other metal bands at the time. It was a little taste of what they had, and there's some really, really good shit on this album, like Night on Brocken, the title track. And then my favorite song on the album, the epic ballad, which you're seeing a live rendition of, known as Damnation. Your world is sin, let the plague begin. Damnation! There's some weak songs in this album, especially the two instrumental songs, but the turd of the day has to go to the obvious Iron Maiden Transylvania ripoff, known as Shadowfax. But to tap into their creative abilities and to finally achieve the greatness of prog metal, the greatness that Fate's Warning would reach, they would need to conjure the Spectre Within. That was cheesy as fuck. Spectre Within still stands as one of my absolute favorite Fate's Warning albums ever. They stepped up their game completely with this album, with a completely original and different sound that was both very, very power metal and very, very prog metal. John Arch sounds way better, the songwriting is way better. And the first album, the band was trying to be something that they weren't, Iron Maiden, but this album, it's like they were finally sitting in a very comfy-ass chair. The album came out in 1985 and is chock full of great prog metal songs like Traveler in Time, Orphan Gypsy, Without a Trace. I mean, the whole damn track list is incredible. But my favorite songs in the album happen to be on the second half of it. The Apparition, which still stands as one of the band's most classic and most well-known songs that should have gotten a fucking music video. I mean, listen to this shit. And then Kyrie Elysian is very, very cool, starting with a really cool medieval intro that goes into crazy speed metal madness. But my favorite song on this album has to go to the caboose on this epic train. A song that for me is Fate's Warning's Hallowed Be Thy Name, known as Epitaph. But could they top such perfection? Next, Fates Warning would put out what me and many other fans consider to be the absolute greatest Fates Warning album ever. An extremely progressive and incredibly heavy, and an album with John Arch's best vocal performance ever. Their magnum opus known only as Awaken the Guardian. Awaken the Guardian improves on everything that the fantastic last album did in almost every single way. The performances are already notably better, especially from John Arch, who delivers some of the weirdest and most incredible vocal harmonies and vocal techniques I've ever heard. His singing on this album fluctuates throughout his entire range on every single song and is absolutely stunning. Awaken the Guardian came out in 1986. This is also the first album with fan favorite lead guitarist Frank Oresti. Dream Theater, especially Mike Portnoy, have said this album has a huge influence, especially on their first album, When Dream and Day Unite, and you could hear the similarities. And when John Arch left the band, Mike Portnoy actually tried to get John Arch to join Dream Theater for the first album, and just his singing alone over Dream Theater's early stuff just sounds exactly like Fates Warning.
My one and only lead. I love it when I sound to you. I am a
The album is full of incredible, melodic, hooky, and even really heavy, badass songs. Every song has a lot of crazy technical playing that is very, very hard to duplicate, especially in songs like The Sorceress, A Valley of Dolls, that require a lot of incredible technique to play. Guardian, the epic ballad, stands as a song that, once again, should be a fucking single. It's criminal how this song doesn't have a music video, considering how it's almost like one. It's like a power ballad sort of thing. One of my other favorite songs in this album is the badass Giant's Lore. The incredible epic Exodus is also amazing. But my favorite song has to go to what used to be my least favorite song, believe it or not, Prelude to Ruin. After this album, John Arch was fired from Fates Warning because he had trouble finding time to tour with Fates Warning because he had to keep a steady job as well, and he was afraid that he wouldn't make enough money with Fates Warning. However, he stated that he would have quit his job if the band had asked him, but they just kicked him out. Instead, they got another talented vocalist named Ray Alder. So they kicked John Arch's ass to the curb to replace him with a very talented vocalist that was both equally as talented at singing as he is at destroying his own voice through smoking. In the early days, he was a very good John Arch replacement that could sing very high, but he quickly fucked up his voice. This album pretty much continues the trend that they were doing for the last couple albums. What's sad is even though the performances and the songwriting are pretty damn good, and Ray Alder gives an admirable performance, it just makes me feel what could have been if they still had John Arch in the band. A lot of these songs don't really follow Ray Alder's vocal style, but more like if the album was written for John Arch. However, this album is easily their heaviest album of all time. What pisses me off though is that only after they get rid of John Arch, the best singer ever, they finally start to make music videos for this band and start promoting them. They had 2 music videos, Silent Cries and Anarchy Divine. What hurts this album, though, is the fact that it feels like it was made for a guy that's no longer in the band, and a song called Shades of Heavenly Death which fuses a lot of really heavy songwriting and prog, but it just translates terribly into a clusterfuck. Now, while the band got really heavy on this album, they simultaneously got very, very proggy with their very first prog suite, a badass 20-minute song known as The Ivory Gates of Dreams. On this song especially, it really feels like Ray Alder's trying to be John Arch. It just pisses me off that John Arch wasn't able to sing such an incredible song. Don't get me wrong, Ray Alder's really good, but Ray's even admitted that John Arch's biggest fan is Ray Alder, and that there is no match to John Arch. It's not my favorite Fates Warning album, but I definitely recommend this album to someone new to the band because it is really the dividing line between the John Arch and the Ray Alder eras. This is when the band starts getting a lot less metal like in the early days and start going into a direction that's way more prog rock oriented. Enter the progressive drum god Mark Zonder, who delivers a blistering performance throughout this entire album. And speaking of lineup changes, we also have Kevin Moore from Dream Theater making some appearances on this album. However, he would become more of a permanent member later down the road after he leaves Dream Theater. Now, this album sparks a shift that they would abandon on the next album, but then return to on a later date. This is them going very, very prog and significantly less metal, which helps and hurts them because on this album there's a lot of really cool songs like At Fate's Hand or Part of the Machine, but there's a lot of really weak moments that are especially bad because of Ray Alder's deteriorating vocals. His vocals went from high-pitched greatness in the last album to insanely irritating whines on this album. The album sounds very 90s, but it came out in 1989. A lot of people say that this is one of their best albums, but for me, it begins kind of a weaker era of the band. There's still some really good stuff on it, like I said, especially the ballad Chasing Time. My favorite song is the epic at the very end of the album, Nothing Left to Say.
The pride and the drive that sucks in the dream turned into an endless obsession, caught in a vicious circle of compulsion.
I was never a big fan of the single music video Through Different Eyes, but for me the worst song is A World Apart, just completely generic and uninteresting.
Whoa guys, going mainstream really seemed to work for Queensryche. Let's see if we could do it.
There's nothing more pathetic than a prog band going pop rock. To be fair though, this album does have some pretty damn good songs on it, just like Queensryche Empire, which just seems to be ripping off. But the big problem with doing something like this, especially with going mainstream in the late 80s, early 90s, is that you really risk fucking your whole career because your original fan base is not going to be happy with this decision. I mean, you'll get some new fans, but this time when hair metal and stuff like that was not popular anymore, they really just lost as many fans as they gained, so it really didn't help them. A lot of fans seem to consider this the absolute best album from the band, or the best Ray Alder album. I don't see why. Maybe because it was their first album and it brought in a lot of fans, I guess. But once again, it really turned off a lot of fans as well. And for me, it's not even as good as the next album, which is pretty much a carbon copy of it. The songwriting is just not as strong on this. There are some really good moments though, like the epic song The 11th Hour, We Only Say Goodbye, of course the opening track Leave the Past Behind, and of course another awesome music video song, Eye to Eye. My favorite song is easily another song that had a music video called Point of View. There are some really shitty moments like the song Life in Still Water, which features James LaBrie from Dream Theater. For me, the most abysmal thing on this album is easily the most boring and plotting song on it. The last song, known as The Road Goes On Forever, because this song just goes on forever.
Sometimes I lose sight of where I'm going, fed by a flame I can't remember.
The album is just nothing special at all, and definitely not what it's hyped up to be. This is the closest the band has ever gotten to big commercial success, and since no one has really heard of them, of course, it didn't really work.
Well, guys, I guess going commercial didn't work very well, so I don't know, try it again!
Hey fucking idiots, it didn't work last time, so don't fucking try to go commercial again. Seriously, how stupid are these guys? Do they not understand business? No one gave a shit on your last album, and clearly hair metal is not in, so quit trying to do this shit. No one cares. You're just hurting yourself. But this album's actually not that bad. I actually like this one a bit more than Parallels. It's full of some pretty cool catchy songs like Outside Looking In, Pale Fire, and I like the sort of epic Monument. And I like almost every song on this album a little bit, except for the last one, Afterglow, which is just so cheesy it hurts. But my favorite song on this album is the kind of keyboard heavy and kind of cheesy but incredible song called Face the Fear. I don't know if you guys can tell, but the album's called Inside Out. Yeah, you can't really see it on the artwork very well. Fate's warning, you're a prog metal band, you're not Queensryche, and you're not hair metal, so stop! The band have lost a lot of their following because they went commercial, and they lost the fan favorite guitarist Frank Oresti. The band itself seemed to be lost, so what would they do to continue through the horrid 90s? First, they would recruit former Dream Theater keyboardist Kevin Moore to replace Frank Oresti on the album. So they decided to go super prog in this album by making the whole album one long song that has many parts known as A Pleasant Shade of Grey. A full song that's about a midlife crisis, an album that's described as the perfect album for a dark, rainy day. The performances and songwriting in this album are a huge step up, and this to me is the absolute greatest Ray Alder album of all time, even though it is considered very different for the band. Kevin Moore really brings incredible atmosphere on this one. Instead of going crazy jazz like he would on Dream Theater albums, he went very dark and industrial to help the rest of the band. And this is the first time when Ray Alder's voice really comes into its own on this album. His lower register singing that's really dark and powerful sounds way better than him trying to wail notes and try to impersonate John Arch. This late 90s classic still stands as one of the greatest prog metal albums ever and has not aged a day on. And best and worst moments, I mean, the whole damn album is one song, so I mean, that's your best song, so yeah. Is it as good as Spectre Within, Awaken the Guardian? Hell yeah, it is.
You are disconnected.
Disconnected came out in the year 2000. Just like the John Arch period, they have back-to-back incredible albums. This album is very similar to Pleasant Shaded Grey, just like how Awaken the Guardian was very similar to Spectre Within. You could say that on this album they refined a lot of this stuff a lot more. A lot of it feels a little bit more proggy, and the keyboard melodies seem to be a little bit more haunting, a little bit more well thought out. They're also not reprising a lot of parts like they did on the last album because it was all one song. This album has a lot of incredible prog songs on it, like So, which is one of my favorites, that has incredible haunting keyboards. The really heavy One and Pieces of Me are really great. But my favorite songs in the album, and everyone's favorites, are of course the two epic songs. Now, most people's favorite song is Still Remains, which is the longest on the album, and considered by many to be the greatest Ray Alder period song. Now, I do love Still Remains, but my favorite is Something from Nothing.
I never needed, and everything I knew was wrong. I never thought I needed so much.
If I had to pick a weak song, it's the instrumental opening and ending of the album, but I mean, I don't really count that much. They once again pump out an incredible masterpiece of prog metal.
That is one big pile of shit.
Yeah, this album is uninteresting, boring ass in every way, shape, and form. Avoid this album like herpes. So Fate's Warning had just hit their stride with two classic albums, but then they put out something really uninspired and boring. The reason for that is that it seems like Jim Matheos was focusing all of his songwriting energy into something else. Now, what happened to the absolute legend John Arch during this time? He was actually on hiatus since he tried to join Dream Theater in the late 80s, but finally he was brought back into the spotlight by Jim Matheos and the fans, and Matheos and Arch formed a new solo project known as Arch Matheos. So they have an EP and an album, so let's kill two birds with one stone. Ah yes, the legendary return of my favorite vocalist, John Arch. Now by this time, not only was John Arch back in the picture kind of, but Frank Oresti, the fan favorite guitarist, returned to Fate's Warning and joined this project along with Jim Matheos and John Arch. John Arch's vocals have not aged a day, which shows what wonders will do if you don't smoke or drink, and if you preserve your voice without hurting it over decades. And his lyric writing genius is still intact as well. Now for the first thing that they did, A Twist of Fate, the John Arch EP, they actually got Mike Portnoy from Dream Theater to play drums, which is really cool. A Twist of Fate came out in 2003, and John Arch actually said that he had to get his vocals trained again to even do what he used to be able to do, that he was having trouble at first. As many of you know, and as you can see, his vocals sound the exact same. This guy was a legend. And in my opinion, you know, he left Fate's Warning around the time Iron Maiden needed a new vocalist. I think he should have replaced Blaze Bayley, and Bruce would have never even needed to come back. That's how good this fucking guy was. But back to Twist of Fate, there's only 2 songs on it, and they're both pretty long, and it makes my choice of best and worst song fairly easy. The best song going to Relentless, a badass epic song with a lot of great changes, and the worst song going to the solely written by John Arch song that's incredibly irritating, Cheyenne. It was a cool EP, but they could definitely top it. And in 2011, Jim Matheos used all of his writing resources again for a masterpiece album known as Sympathetic Resonance, which feels so much like old. This album is very metal, very kick-ass. All the riffs are really catchy and awesome, and almost every song is just amazing. And this is almost like the next Fate's Warning album with John Arch, even though it, of course, isn't Fate's Warning. The best on this album has to go to 2 songs. I really do love the song that you're hearing right now, Midnight Serenade, but another incredible song is the last epic song on the album, Any Given Day. However, there is one notable clunker on this album, a song that badly tries to copy the amazing classic Prelude to Ruin, but fucks up in almost every way. We're talking about On the Fence. What's interesting is that the lineup that Jim Matheos got on this album would become the Fate's Warning lineup at the time, so this is pretty much Fate's Warning minus Ray Alder at the time. Meanwhile, in Fate's Warning... After Jim Matheos was done working on the Sympathetic Resonance album, in 2013, Fate's Warning released Darkness in a Different Light, and just like last time with FWX, where it seemed like they focused all their energy in the John Arch project, once again, Jim Matheos was kind of lackluster with the songwriting. There's just not that many really good songs in this album. What makes it worse is it sounds a lot like Ray Alder kind of blew out his voice, like the cigarettes have finally really gotten him, because a lot of his vocals on here don't really sound powerful like they used to. They sound really raspy. But fear not, his vocals will soon make a great recovery, but just on this album it really seemed like they didn't give a shit. Even the big epic And Yet It Moves feels a little bit disjointed, however it is still pretty cool. My favorite song is the catchy and badass song, I Am. Now there's a lot of really dull and kind of shitty songs in this album, and it's just kind of a decent album overall, but for me the kingpin piece of shit has to be Desire. It seemed a lot like Jim Matheos wasn't giving a shit about Fate's Warning anymore. Could they put out a really good album again, or are they going to get stuck in mediocrity? Are they going to reunite with John Arch, because it seems a lot like he's focusing all of his efforts in the John Arch projects. In fact, recently they even played live with John Arch, playing the entire Awaken the Guardian album again for the fans. So are we going to see a reunion, or can Fate's Warning with their new album Theories of Flight put all those ideas to shame? Well, let's find out.
Oh! home
Please forgive me, Jim Matheos and Ray Alder, for doubting your abilities. You guys have really put out an incredible album, Theories of Flight. This album really tries to kind of return to the greatness of Pleasant Shade of Grey and Disconnected, but going for a different feel a little bit too. The album's a little bit more melodic, a little bit more prog, and even more heavy. I'd say this is maybe their heaviest album since No Exit. And you get a lot of variety in this album. The first two songs, From the Rooftops and 7 Stars, are very, very catchy, radio-friendly songs. And then you have, of course, the two incredible epics, which I love almost equally, The Ghosts of Home and Light and Shade of Things. But man, if I had to pick one of the two as my favorite, I mean, the heavy song White Flag is also one of my favorites, but man, my favorite song is the epic The Light and Shade of Things. The song just progresses fantastically, and the atmosphere reminds me of like a really good Tool song. The album ends very weird with the song called Theories of Flight, which I feel is very much connected with the second to last song, Ghosts of Home. And I believe the theme of this album is not theories of like flying away, but more trying to get away from depression and having to move around the country a lot and stuff like that, and losing your friends and losing people that are kind of like family to you. The idea of moving on is very, very prevalent in this album, and overall, it is probably my favorite album of the year. However, there is one song that it's not one of my favorites, and that song is Like Stars or Eyes Have Seen. It's got its moments, but it's just kind of okay.
See the dark road that's ahead, lit by memories you know.
So that's Fate's Warning. I hope you guys like my very first retrospective. Believe it or not, I did this whole thing in a day. It was pretty damn fun, and I hope to continue doing stuff like this from now on. I'm going to rank their albums here worst to best, so pay attention to the artwork.